294. That is the number Five Oaks logged from Mayon summit in a single 24-hour period. 294 rockfall events. And then, before that day ended, 2 pyroclastic flows descended the southeastern flank. Not at the same time, not simultaneously, sequentially, as if the mountain was demonstrating something. First the count, then the consequence. The scientists watching the monitors already knew what came next. The question they are now working through, the one that will determine how far the next evacuation zone extends, is not whether more are coming. It is what size. Here is what this video is going to show you. Most coverage of Mayon's rockfalls treats them as a background feature, a symptom, a side effect, something happening on the mountain while the real story develops. That framing is wrong, and here is why it matters. Rockfalls on Mayon are not falling rocks. They are a specific geological signal, a countdown mechanism built into the structure of the growing dome at Mayon's summit. 294. In one day is not a random number, it has a physical meaning. It tells you something precise about the internal state of a lava dome that has been growing under pressure. And the 2 pyroclastic flows that followed are not just a consequence of that number. They are its proof. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly what 294 rockfalls are counting down to, and why the scientists at the Philippine Institute of Volcanology are not watching the rockfalls anymore. They are watching what happens in the intervals between them. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHIVOLS, operates a monitoring network around Mayon that is among the most capable in Southeast Asia. Seismometers positioned at multiple azimuths around the cone, a continuous camera network providing real-time visual monitoring of the summit and upper flanks, SO2 flux sensors, tilt meters, GPS ground deformation stations. When Five Oaks issues a bulletin reporting 294 rockfall events in a 24-hour window, that number is not estimated, it is counted. Each rockfall generates a seismic signal, a specific waveform that trained algorithms and monitoring scientists can distinguish from other signals. Tectonic earthquakes, volcanic earthquakes, low-frequency tremor, explosion signals, and rockfalls. Each one logged, each one time-stamped, each one plotted on a frequency graph that across the day drew a curve that the volcanologists watching it recognized not as random noise, as acceleration. The rockfall frequency wasn't flat across the day. It built. And at 2 points during that build, Five Oaks. Cameras captured material traveling not as individual falling rocks, but as a coherent flow. Fast-moving, dense, superheated, pyroclastic density currents. Both traveled down the Mi-isi and Bonga gullies on Mayon's southeastern flank, the drainage channels that have historically been the primary pathways for Mayon's most hazardous flows. The first extended approximately 2 kilometers from the summit. The second extended 5. Those distances are inside the current permanent danger zone, but the direction of the number, from 2 to 5 kilometers, across a single day, is the detail that changes how you read everything that follows. To understand what 294 rockfalls mean, you need to understand what is sitting at Mayon's summit, a lava dome. A lava dome is not a lake of molten rock. It is not a crater filled with lava. It is an extrusion, thick, viscous magma pushed upward through the vent and piling up rather than flowing away. Think of it like toothpaste squeezed from a tube and left to accumulate at the opening. Except the toothpaste is rock, and it is being pushed from below by a magmatic system under significant pressure. The dome at Mayon's summit has been growing throughout this eruption cycle. As it grows, it does 2 things simultaneously. It gets larger, and it gets less stable. Here's the physics that most coverage skips entirely. A lava dome grows not as a uniform solid mass, but as an active structure with a hardened outer crust and a still molten interior. The outer crust, cooled, brittle, fractured, is constantly being pushed outward by the pressure from the molten core. As the dome expands, the outer crust cannot keep up with the rate of expansion. It cracks, it fractures. Sections of it break off. Those broken sections tumble down the steep upper flanks of Mayon's cone, which has gradients exceeding 35 degrees near the summit. Those broken sections are the rockfalls, 294 of them in a single day. Each one is a piece of dome that the system could no longer hold. And here's the detail no mainstream coverage is explaining. When the pieces that break off are large enough, or when they break off in the right configuration, they do not fall as individual rocks. They entrain the hot gas and fine fragmented material surrounding the dome and transform into something else, something that moves at 100 kilometers per hour, at 500 degrees Celsius for 5 kilometers. That transformation from rockfall to pyroclastic flow is not a separate event. It is a rockfall that reached its threshold. Here is what officials are not framing clearly. The 294 rockfall day did not occur without warning. Five Oaks bulletins in the days preceding it showed a trend. Not 294, not even close, but rising. 50 rockfall events per day, then 70, then 110, then the count crossed 200, then 294, then 2 pyroclastic density currents. That progression, the acceleration of rockfall frequency preceding pyroclastic flow generation, is documented in 5 Volks data from previous Mayon eruption cycles. In the 2018 eruption, which became the most destructive in Mayon's modern history, rockfall frequency escalation preceded significant pyroclastic activity by approximately 24 to 72 hours. In 2009, another major Mayon eruption episode, the same pattern appeared: rockfall acceleration, then pyroclastic flows, then lava fountain episodes, then the peak of the eruption sequence. 5 Volks scientists are not seeing 294 rockfalls as an isolated data point. They are seeing it as a position on a curve they have tracked before. And the question is not whether they have seen this position before. They have. The question is, what came next the last time they were here? There is a word used in bulletins, pyroclastic density current, that most people do not viscerally understand. Let's fix that. A pyroclastic flow is not lava. It is not slow. It is not survivable in its direct path. It is a mixture of hot gas, ash, and fragmented rock material, some of it still partially molten, that flows down a volcano's flank as a coherent, fast-moving mass. The temperature inside ranges from 400 to 700 degrees Celsius. For reference, the cremation temperature for human remains is approximately 870 to 980 degrees Celsius. A pyroclastic flow at 600 degrees does not incinerate. It kills by heat alone before it arrives. The thermal pulse traveling ahead of the flow is fatal before the material itself reaches you. The velocity ranges from 100 to 700 kilometers per hour depending on topography and volume. You cannot outrun it if you are in the flow path. There's no version of, "I'll wait and see if it comes this way." The 1993 Mayon event that killed 5 Volks scientists and volcanology colleagues, 14 scientists and journalists total, was a pyroclastic surge, a smaller, less dense version of a full pyroclastic flow. It killed trained scientists who knew exactly what Mayon was capable of, who had instruments, who were monitoring, who understood the risk better than anyone in the vicinity. They were in the hazard zone because science requires proximity. The surge did not grant exceptions. The 2 PDCs logged this week traveled 5 kilometers. The permanent danger zone extends 6 kilometers from the summit. Those flows stayed well inside the zone. But the flows from previous major eruption episodes have traveled further. In 2018, pyroclastic flows reached 4 kilometers. In 2006, 6 kilometers. In 2001, flows traveled beyond 6. The current 2. 5 is not the ceiling. It is an early measurement from a system that is still building. Start at the dome. The dome fragments. Material cascades down the Mi-isi gully. The flow reaches 5 kilometers. Ashfall disperses over communities downwind of the southeastern flank. Move outward. The 6-kilometer permanent danger zone contains agricultural land, barangays that have been under evacuation, orders for months, structures that are empty, farms that are not being tended. But the outer edge of that zone, the 7, 8, 10-kilometer radius, is not empty. Communities exist there. People have been told they are outside the danger zone. That designation is based on current dome size and current pyroclastic flow runout. Current, a dome that produced 294 rockfalls in one day and 2 pyroclastic flows, is not the same dome it was at the start of this eruption episode. It is larger, more pressurized, more unstable, and the runout distances of its pyroclastic flows are a function of dome volume and eruption energy, both of which are still increasing. Move outward further. Albay province hosts one of the busiest provincial airports in the Philippines, Legazpi Airport. Ashfall from Mayon eruptions has historically forced temporary closure of Legazpi Airport, disrupting the only reliable air link between the region and Manila. During the 2023 eruption, ashfall advisories affected ground operations on multiple occasions. A major escalation, significant explosive activity at the summit, would produce ash, columns that enter aviation corridors in one of the most air traffic dense archipelago systems on Earth. Move outward one final time. Mayon sits in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Its eruption behavior is monitored by the Darwin VAAC, Volcanic Ash Advisory Center, which tracks ash clouds for aviation safety across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. A Mayon escalation does not stay above Albay province. The ash goes where the wind takes it, into corridors, into turbine paths, into the decision matrix of airlines routing between Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Australia. 294 rockfalls and 2 pyroclastic flows is a regional aviation notice waiting to be issued. Here is what the monitoring bulletins are actually saying beneath the technical language. SO2 flux remains elevated. Sulfur dioxide output is the direct exhaust of magma degassing near the surface. The numbers 5 Volks is currently logging are consistent with active magma at shallow depth. feeding the dome, maintaining pressure, sustaining the extrusion rate that keeps the dome growing. Seismicity beneath the summit includes both high-frequency volcanic earthquakes, rock, fracturing under stress and low-frequency events, fluid movement in the conduit. Both types present simultaneously means the system is both mechanically stressed and actively supplied with magma. Ground deformation data from tilt meters near the summit shows inflation that has not plateaued. A dome that is still inflating is a dome that is still growing. A dome that is still growing is a dome that is still producing more material to crack, fragment, and fall. The 294 rockfalls were not the system at its maximum. They were the system at its maximum for that day. Tomorrow's maximum depends on whether the inflation has stabilized overnight. The monitoring data, as of the most recent 5 Volks bulletin, does not show stabilization. It shows continuation. There are 3 ways to read 294 rockfalls and 2 pyroclastic flows inside a single calendar day. Dome extrusion continues at its current rate. Rockfall generation remains high, possibly exceeding 294 on subsequent days, but the pyroclastic flows generated by dome fragmentation stay within the current runout range, 2 to 3 kilometers, inside the permanent danger zone, below the populated threshold. 5 Volks maintains the alert level. Evacuation zones hold. The dome eventually reaches a structural configuration where extrusion rate slows and the system finds a temporary equilibrium. This is consistent with some previous Mayon dome growth episodes that stabilized without major explosive escalation. Its weakness: Mayon's dome growth episodes have historically preceded, not concluded, the most hazardous phase of the eruption sequence. A section of the growing dome fails structurally, not the entire dome, a flank, a buttress, a section whose internal pressure exceeds the structural strength of its cooled outer crust. This produces a larger pyroclastic flow, significantly larger than the current 2, 5 kilometers, potentially 4 to 5 kilometers, potentially reaching the outer boundary of the permanent danger zone. 5 Volks raises the alert level. Extended danger zones are expanded. Communities at 6 to 8 kilometers receive evacuation advisories. This outcome is not catastrophic in the 1814 Kagsawa sense, but it is significant. It is injurious. And it is the scenario that the 294 rockfall acceleration most directly precedes, based on the pattern 5 Volks has documented across multiple eruption cycles. When a lava dome accumulates sufficient pressurized gas in its interior, and when the outer crust is simultaneously weakened by the fracturing that produces rockfalls, there is a threshold at which the dome does not simply collapse. It decompresses explosively. The pressurized gas and fragmented magma release upward and outward simultaneously. This is the mechanism behind Mayon's most historically destructive events: the 1814 eruption, the 1897 eruption that killed more than 400 people, the 1993 event. All were preceded by dome instability, by rockfall escalation. By the same sequence the data is currently tracing. The probability assigned to this third outcome by any 5 Volkist scientist is not 0. After 294 rockfalls and 2 pyroclastic flows in a single day, it is not even comfortably low. Here is what the monitoring data tells 5 Volks. The dome is growing. The rockfall rate is accelerating. The pyroclastic flows are lengthening. The SO2 and seismicity are consistent with continued shallow magma supply. Here is what the monitoring data cannot tell 5 Volks. The internal gas content of the dome's molten core, the precise geometry of the fracture network developing inside the dome's crust, the same fractures that will determine whether the next major failure is a partial collapse or a full decompression, the exact depth of the magma currently feeding the extrusion, whether the supply rate is increasing, steady, or beginning to wane. These are not trivial unknowns. They are the specific parameters that separate the dome collapses partially, pyroclastic flows reach 4 kilometers, alert level goes to 4 pores, from the dome decompresses explosively, the ash column reaches 10 kilometers, and the pyroclastic flows travel beyond the permanent danger zone. 5 Volks monitors those parameters with every tool available to them. But the dome's interior is not directly accessible. Every inference about what is inside it is derived from what is observable from outside it. The seismicity, the SO2, the tilt meter readings, the visual progression of dome growth captured on monitoring cameras. Those external signals are the shadow the dome casts, not the dome itself. And right now, the shadow is telling 5 Volks something is under pressure inside that structure. But the precise magnitude of that pressure cannot be read until the dome decides how it wants to release it. 294. Rockfalls is the dome releasing pressure in the smallest way available to it. The question that cannot be answered is whether small releases are enough to prevent a large one. Let's go back to the beginning, the monitoring room, the seismogram, the rockfall counter climbing through the day, 1, 12, 40, 110. then 250, 270, then 294. Each one logged, each one time-stamped, each one a piece of dome that the system could no longer hold. And then, twice in that same day, the counter didn't increment. Instead, a different signal, a different waveform, a different category entirely. Pyroclastic density current. 2 kilometers, then 2, 5. The camera caught it, the seismograph caught it, the SO2 sensor caught the spike. And the scientists watching, who have seen this mountain do this before, who have studied its patterns across eruption cycles, who have read the bulletins from the eruptions that came before they were born, they did not reach for certainty. They reached for the next data point, because 294 rockfalls in a single day is a number, and numbers on Mayon are not conclusions. They are questions. The dome is still there. It is larger than it was yesterday. It is more fractured than it was yesterday. It is under the same pressure it was building toward yesterday. The 295th rockfall happened at some point this morning. The 296th followed it. The question is not whether they are coming. The question is whether one of them, not this one, maybe not the next 100, but one of them reaches the threshold at which the dome's outer crust can no longer absorb the pressure from the molten core beneath it, at which the fracture network connecting the rockfalls to each other finds a pathway all the way to the center, at which the dome does not fragment, at which it opens. 5-Volks is watching the count, they are watching the SO2, they are watching the tilt meter. They are watching the camera feed from the summit where the dome sits, growing and cracking and shedding itself in pieces that used to be solid rock, and are now falling down the same gullies that have carried every major pyroclastic flow this mountain has ever produced. 294. The number is already higher today, and the dome is not finished growing yet.